Hi, my name is Ethan Davis with Fort Hays State University, and this will be my final media clip covering the various exceptionalities and teaching methods that we learned in this semester in educating exceptional students. So the different types of exceptionalities that may be seen in the classroom, may be emotional, visual impairment or blindness, attention deficit disorder, and attention deficit hyperactive disorder, dyslexia. There's autism, hearing impaired or deafness. There are various physical impairments. There are other specific learning disabilities. There's speech and language impairments. There are going to be students that may have suffered traumatic brain injuries. And then there are going to be other, various health impairments. Now, some of the signs of these exceptionalities may be various, different delays in development, issues with remembering, class content or remembering different daily comings and goings. There could be difficulty in following social cues. Students may, if they're displaying, rash behaviors with their decision making or issues with critical thinking, issues with adaptive behavior, excess fidgeting or moving around, problems paying attention and staying on task, and difficulties in social environments. And those are just to list a few of the signs of the exceptionalities that may be seen. Now, regardless of any sort of exceptionality a student may or may not have, everything in the classroom should be tailored to meet the needs of each individual student. There should be no exclusion or little to no exclusion. It's vital for students to be in a full classroom environment as to avoid the feeling of isolation and not being good enough. Social skills are definitely a major player when it comes to education. And it's hard for students to be able to develop and hone those if they're removed from a normal classroom environment on a consistent basis or even full time. Now, I understand that there will be cases where it's necessary for some students to be placed in a special needs classroom, but it's still a teacher's responsibility and my future responsibility to try and include every single student as often as possible, making sure lessons are crafted that fit each and every student's needs to fully benefit them. Now, when it comes to the principles of universal design for learning, there are three. Learners definitely need various ways of attaining and grasping information and knowledge in the classroom. Simply standing at the front of the classroom and lecturing is not the way to go about it. Most students simply aren't going to retain the information because they're not interested in learning and what those means. Each lesson needs to stimulate learning, and since each student is different, an educator needs to be able to determine the ways that are to best approach lesson plans on an individual basis. Having an overall class lesson is great, but it should have numerous parts that actively engage each student so as to grab hold of their thirst for knowledge. Each student learns best in their own way and at their own pace, and educators need to remember this. I definitely plan to keep that fact at the top of my priorities when it comes to my future classroom so as to fully benefit each and every student that walks through my door. The second principle is, an educator needs to have alternatives for needs to provide students alternatives for demonstrating what they know versus, the normal paths or what is typically expected in a standard classroom. Students shouldn't be expected to each display their knowledge in the same manner. That's tedious and boring, and it just doesn't work for everybody. Students should have options that they can choose from. This keeps students engaged and interested in the topic at hand. By allowing the students to work in different ways, it can also boost their confidence when it comes to schooling. If the options available don't fit each student, then it's the educator's responsibility and my future responsibility to find other alternatives and other avenues of of learning and expressing the knowledge learned. The best way to do this is obviously research, you know, keeping communication open between me and my future colleagues, and definitely keeping communication open between the student and their parents, as parents typically have a pretty good idea as to what works best for their student in school. By doing this, you're allowing the student to express themselves and their knowledge in a way that's comfortable to them, and they are much more likely to grasp the information that they're supposed to be learning, furthering their success in the classroom and hopefully overall in life. Now, the third and last principle is lessons should be fine-tuned to each individual in order to hold their interest, provide proper challenges, and boost motivation for learning. Educators need to be able to determine why the students want to learn, as well as the best way for them to learn. Students should be able to enjoy their time in the classroom and not consistently stress because they're not understanding the content. It's the educator's responsibility to make sure each student is really interested in the subject matter and is learning in their own way, because that's what's beneficial to the student. That means that educators need to be compassionate. They need to have flexibility, and the drive to adapt for each student should definitely be in play every single day. Lessons should be fun and interactive. They should allow the students some freedom in the classroom to work amongst themselves, whether that's working on an individual basis or allowing students to work in pairs or groups or even just as a whole class. Lessons should allow definitely should allow some wiggle room for creativity and imagination, as that can be a major factor for many children when it comes to them not enjoying school. If the student's not able to express themselves and learn in a way that's best for them, they're not going to want to learn. And I feel that's where differentiated instruction comes into play. Lessons should vary, as students each learn again at a different rate and learn in different ways. I plan to be there for my future students as best I can, and to guide them and to provide knowledge in numerous ways that I feel are most beneficial. But students should also be able to push themselves and push each other when it comes to learning. They shouldn't always have to rely on the teacher. Micromanaging is bad enough in the workplace. It shouldn't be in the classroom either. I feel that the varying avenues of learning are much like a major highway that branches off all into one big final destination. You're on this super highway, and there are 8 different lanes that all lead to the same place. Students should have access to each and every lane, being able to go at their own speed limit, all of which lead to the same destination, which in my view is not only being successful, but allowing this, giving the students the opportunity to find enjoyment in the classroom and in learning, and ultimately in themselves.